Sweet. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. I wanted to put together like a instructional design 101 session with Kendra, one of our instructional designers here at GitLab. I'm Josh Zimmerman. I'm an L&D partner, and I build learning content just like all of you all. So I was curious just to learn more about, instructional design, sort of best practices and principles, applying adult learning theory to kind of what we do at GitLab. And put together an agenda just with some high level questions, but, Kendra too, I didn't know if there's anything specifically you wanted to talk through or go over.
Yeah, we can go ahead and go over the questions first. So just to introduce myself, my name is Kendra Marquart. I'm the senior instructional designer for the professional services team. So I, along with Christine, build all of the content that we deliver to our clients. So all of our external customers who purchase our training on how to use the product. So I started in instructional design 8 years ago. I started out as a trainer almost 12 years ago, where I was a technical trainer, and I kept sending in suggestions for the content over and over again until the manager of the department kind of got irritated and just told me to apply. So it was not it's not like I went to college and then went, and I was never in education. It was never something that I ever thought I would end up in, and it just kind of happened. So I've been in the industry for about 10 years as far as training and design goes, but I've been a designer for 8 years now. I started when it was just, grayscale Word documents. I'm sure Christine is familiar with the old school style. And then more into e-learning. So my specialty is around e-learning, authoring, and gamification is my passion. That's what I like doing. Building fun little review games and different types of interactive e-learning that you can use for any kind of circumstance to increase memory retention of the people that you have in your courses. As far as the second question for adult learning theory, so there is several different learning methodologies throughout instructional design. So depending on kind of where you entered instructional design and where you came from, you will see various different methodologies used. So the basic core model of all instructional design is analysis, design and development, and then evaluation. So there is several different methodologies out there. I started on ADDIE, which is the old school model. I think Christine is pretty aligned with that model as well. It is very in-depth as far as the different methodologies that are used in the business. Almost all of them have these 3 sections. Some form of a needs analysis that includes understanding the needs of the training and the audience that you're delivering to. The design and development is around actual design of the content and the instruction materials, and then determining what method of delivery you're going to use, whether it's instructor-led, self-paced, a desk drop, which is like just a PDF that you email out, an article, and then the evaluation section, which is how are you going to determine that the learners actually took away the information that you wanted from that course? Did it create a measurable impact on their behavior? Did their behavior change? Did their skills or their attitude or their knowledge change? Some of the methodologies that you'll see or you'll hear about are ADDIE, Bloom's taxonomy is another really popular one. SAM, the Kilpatrick model, Agile and Rapid, Kemp and action mapping. So you'll see tons of different ones. And I think some of you that were at DevLearn this last week have probably heard a couple of these if you're in any of the ID sessions. The most 2 common ones that I've focused on in my experience is ADDIE. It's, in my opinion, the most thorough of the instructional design models. So this is something that if you're building a full course or a full curriculum from scratch, you're starting from nothing, you want to do a really in-depth needs analysis. You really want to make sure that you do a job task analysis on the people that you're supposed to be training. It's very time consuming though. It does make sure that all gaps are filled. It's not really appropriate for something that's like a minimal viable product or like a little iteration. So it can be kind of hard to do in a really fast-paced environment like what we have here at GitLab, just because it is very time consuming because the stages are very precise and very laid out. And the needs analysis portion usually takes up a lot of that time because you go to each individual audience that you're going to, ensuring that you understand what the training needs are and what skills they already have versus what skills they're going to have to learn. As far as here at GitLab, the most useful one, I think, for our business would be SAM, which is the successive approximation model. So this is split into 3 different sections, and these sections are meant to repeat over and over again for any type of iteration or change that you do to the training. So the first one is just a basic prepare stage. This is where you gather information, you collaborate with your SMEs and your stakeholders. You have a quick little savvy start, your kickoff calls, that type of content. And then you go into the design phase, which is you design the content, you have a prototype or a draft, you have that reviewed, and then rinse and repeat. You keep going until you have a product that's viable enough to send to your audience. And then you develop, where you go into the development stage, you implement it out to your audiences, you do pilots, any kind of rapid training that you want to do to test it to make sure it's working effectively. And then you build your evaluations. So your quiz questions, knowledge checks, exams, certifications. I know on our team in ProServe, we do certifications to ensure that you actually have a measurable data that your learners are retaining the knowledge that you're teaching them. And then same thing, rinse and repeat. So this cycle is meant to consistently go over and over again as you iterate throughout the process. So the reason why SAM is used more often nowadays is just because updates are constantly coming out, and no matter what kind of industry you're in. So as far as anybody on the audience, have you been exposed to any of these methodologies before?
Yes, both Addie and Sam. And we were actually just talking about how we need to move from an Addie perspective to Sam to start releasing more rapid content, because we're really getting kind of hung up in the process that we have now with Addie, and for the field certification team, they haven't been able to release any field cert courses for the enterprise team as of yet, because we've been so lost in the analysis piece. Whereas on my team, I've been delivering content left and right, but I'm doing it in Rise, right? So it's like rapid content. It's very different.
Yeah, I would say the same for us too. Just like not probably definitely applying SAM to the content we develop, but I think we get really hung up sometimes in the collaborating with stakeholders, just because, you know, at GitLab, our culture is very open and transparent. So as you're making your way to developing and designing content, you'll get more input and kind of have to pivot and a lot. So it can be difficult, but I think that's the benefit of the model too. So
yeah, I agree. I think for a business that's so quickly changing, I mean, we have monthly releases on our product. So regardless of what we do, we're not going to have a product in a complete finished state, you know, unless it's like the basics of customer service, you know, something like that, like soft skill type stuff. But as far as the methodologies that I like about it is whether you're using, you know, Addie or Sam, I really like Rapid to Agile or Rapid if you come from, like I have process improvement background. So for me, the Agile kind of fits with my background for that way, but it gives you a step-by-step process, whether it's the 3-step model for Sam or it's the 6-step model for Addie. You have an outline to ensure that you're checking your boxes and your gaps are being filled. So that way you ensure that you reach out to the right stakeholders. You're getting those kind of check-off points to ensure that you don't start with a content, you go create it, and then you get to your stakeholders and it's not what they wanted or it's not what they needed. Yeah. So using this methodologies helps break that so that you don't take a finished product or get done completely with your course and you hand them a package and they're like, okay, this isn't what we intended. This isn't what we wanted. So these type of methodologies helps get away from that. So you're not wasting precious development time, especially in this kind of business. Yeah. And also really fits with our collaboration model that we have here at GitLab. Like me in particular, I tend to use the TAMs and the engagement team, and they're usually or the engineer team, and they're really good about getting feedback back to us.
And Kendra, do you suggest using this approach the majority of the time, because a lot of the content isn't necessarily evergreen. Like if there's evergreen content, then you can be a little bit more addy about it. And is that a true statement? Do you agree with that? Or
for me, it depends on the type of content. For certifications that we're going to be delivering, and we're actually, putting this out there, this is a GitLab certification. I think that's something that definitely needs to have a very good needs analysis. So that would need to be put through a more strenuous approach like Addie. I lucked out because Christine had everything, like an awesome job task analysis and needs analysis before I came on board. So I had this great skeleton that I could take and just run with. Like this outline of everything that I needed. But for something like a certification that you're delivering and something that we're branding as this is a GitLab certification, I think we would want to make sure that we do that needs analysis portion. So something more like Bloom's taxonomy or Addie, where it's a little more in depth, because the needs analysis portion of that needs to be so accurate.
Gotcha.
For such a long certification process. But if it's just like a course that you're doing, like an enablement course or an onboarding course, or maybe you're just doing an overview of a new product release, or an overview of the plan stage or the defense stage or updates, I think that's something that definitely could be done from a SAM perspective. But also keep in mind that once you have that outline built from an Addie, you can switch to the SAM model to keep iterating on it. So you don't need to keep going back and redoing it every time there's an update.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And I'm curious, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but
you're fine.
how did you create these graphics? Like, because they're pretty nice and like, yeah.
So I originally did media in college. So a lot of this stuff is built using infographic templates that I have saved that I've just had forever. And then otherwise it's using a combination of the icon library that I shared in the GitLab Ed content channel, versus also looking at templates that we have available. So I have a lot of these infographics that I just have in my own library that I've used for years, that I just reuse. Awesome. But mainly a lot of the content, and like if I'm building graphics like this, I tend to use Photoshop or InDesign.
No, it looks really good. I'm just curious, just like if we're up leveling our content, it looks really good.
Yeah, these are just things that I like to add in. Oh, sorry, I didn't put my phone on mute. My bad. So as far as the methodologies go, I think Addie would be good for anything that's like a program. So something that's going to have a lot of courses in it. It's going to have a straight up exam or an evaluation, and they're going to be getting a badge for it. That would be something that I would see Addie being used for. But if it's a straightforward course, how to use Salesforce, or how to use, how to create a GitLab issue, something simple that's pretty short and straightforward, I think SAM could be used for that. And then I put in here just a couple of needs analysis templates, and I'll PDF this and send it out to everybody. But these are just links to different needs analysis templates that are out there. Like the CDC has a really good one. And this is something that Christine actually linked to our education services channel. It's the competent display theory. So this is going through the type of content and the performance that you're trying to achieve. So it's a good article on that. And then I also linked the personas and job tasks. That just kind of shows how it's broken down.
And so like the job task analysis, like you would recommend doing that for every role or every audience that you deliver content to? That
you're delivering to. So part of instructional design is ensuring that you know your audience. So you want to know who you're delivering to, because say, for example, we have an issue with GitLab CI/CD. So our course for that, we can get a lot of people in the audience that know what they're doing and they think the course is too basic. But then we get a lot of other people that think the course is too advanced. So by able to find that and understanding our audience, now we know that we're going to be creating a GitLab CI/CD advanced course. Just because the people in the room have such varying different skills, you want to create a baseline. So you need to understand, what's the baseline of what they need to do and how does it reflect the learning objective that you're trying to get. Like for GitLab basics, have they ever been in GitLab before? Have they created an issue before? Have they what is required for their daily job. Do they use GitLab on a day-to-day basis for their job? Do they use the coding feature, stuff like that? And creating your personas and understanding your audience will help you with your objectives as well, especially for, I don't know if we really have test out features yet for L&D or field enablement, but things where if it's something that they've been doing as their daily job, do they really need to waste the time going through the training? So maybe like a test out feature would really help you understand if it's something that maybe they came from another employer where they used GitLab every day for their job. So would they need to go through a GitLab basics course that shows them the exact same thing that they did as their job for the last year?
Got it. That makes sense.
And that job task analysis just really helps you go through and look at it from basic level to understanding, okay, what's the baseline for what this role is going to need? What's the baseline for what this role is going to need?
If I could just add on job task analysis.
Christine did all mine, so.
I'm just adding in, job task analysis is not well understood by a lot of our team members, or even across companies or departments. No one really knows what that is. And it sometimes can get mixed up with competencies, skills, like what do all of these things mean? A lot of people don't understand what they mean. And they're relying on us instructional designers to kind of guide them through what is that? Why do we have to do it? And the one that I did really fast. So the other thing is speed, right? Do we have 3 months to do this JTA, or do we have a month? And so it can vary in the amount of detail, but I feel like what I put together was kind of like bare minimum of what you would need in a job task analysis. I think for roles where we're talking about job tasks that use a lot of soft skills, where that's evergreen. Those soft skills don't change. Those are transferable skills, like communication skills, right? Or leadership skills. That's where I feel like in a job task analysis, it's really good to flesh those out. And also there's probably a lot of off-the-shelf content that you could map. But the point is you want to have a map. You want to have a map so you know what to plug in where, so that people are getting the relevant content for them. And so I can't stress enough how important it is to have that. Otherwise, people are going to be wasting their time on our training content because they're not going to be getting what they need to do their job.
You also have to think about the time.
on JTAs.
Yeah, the time that it's saving you as well. Like Christine said, a lot of the evergreen type content you can guarantee we have somewhere because it's been trained before. So it's not recreating that wheel and then that would give you a signal, hey, I should look to see if we have this because this is a common topic. So saving you time as well. And for me as an instructional designer, when I came in to the company fresh, looking at that job task analysis and the personas that Christine had created really helped me understand the different roles at the from a department level as well, for understanding who I needed to go to stakeholders, like who would know the stuff for this job, like who would know the stuff for this job, like do I go to the TAMs, do I go to the SAs? And so it helps you determine not only your stakeholders, but who would be your SMEs for those roles as well. Another thing that this is kind of a little off topic, but I kind of wanted to talk about some design tips. So one thing that I was asked about by another content curator here is the colors that I use. So I try to always stick to design branding, but there's always images and stuff that we kind of have to use because we're trying to display something. But I wanted to talk a little bit about color psychology, especially because almost all of our training is online training because we're a remote company. So being very aware of the colors that you're using and how they impact a learner's retention. So if they're harsh on the eyes or they're really bright, like this green here, anything that's really clashing with the content, it distracts them from it. And also a lot of them can actually hurt their eyes. So they won't retain that knowledge. So ensuring that you're using the right color for the right kind of content that you're creating and sticking to the brand colors whenever possible. This gives just a little overview.
Do you ever have to take into account like any colorblind or any like neurodiverse pieces? I mean, with your content? Yeah.
I haven't at GitLab, but I have at others. That's why the warm colors come into come into use. That's why they're flagged as the best, because the warm colors translate to colorblind and ocular people a lot better. And also warm colors are the easiest to filter blue light through. So if they have a blue light filter on their screen, they're the easiest where you won't see a difference. Like if I turned on my blue light filter that I have on my monitor, I won't see much of a difference between warm colors, as I would see a huge difference between like these bright greens and the yellow.
Got it.
Our branding colors are actually pretty well staged, especially in that area. The only one that's a little flagging is the bright red for the Tanuki, but all of the others follow the warm pattern. So as long as you stick to our branding colors, you can be pretty safe. The biggest thing that I'll talk about though is ensuring that you're laying the right color on top of each other. So like if you have a purple background, make sure you use white text and vice versa, like ensuring that the text is easily readable. And if you can look at it and it kind of throws you off a little bit, then you need to switch color, which the marketing page actually talks about which colors to use on top of each other. So that will help you as well.
Can I ask an off-topic question? Is this deck? It looks like there's a lot of great links and stuff, content in here. Is this deck linked somewhere? Can we put the
yes. Let me get
links?
I'll put this in the meeting. I don't know where I'm gonna put this. I'll just put this here. There you go.
Yeah, no, this is a lot of really great information. Thanks, Kendra, for putting it together.
I tried to put links
Yes,
for things wherever possible. The other topic that I wanted to go over, I put this in the GitLab curator section as well, but creating good objectives. This is something that I am notoriously horrible about. I've gotten better, but I tend to just write fast ones. But the basis of it is making sure that you're writing the right objective for the right action. So whether it's a skill, an attitude, or a knowledge that you're trying to reinforce or trying to get them to learn, ensure that you always use an action verb. So what will the learner be able to do at the end of this lesson? I'm a really big fan of what's in it for me, using that type of methodology. Like, how is this going to help you do your job? You know, at the end of this lesson, you're going to know how to create an issue in GitLab, or, you know, the associate's going to be able to create a valid, you know, GitLab YAML file. And then I've always followed the ABCD model. I believe the D is labeled differently depending on where you learned it from. Like Christine, did you have a different D from your training? I went through Clark training. I don't know where you went through, but the D changes depending on where you go.
The D, sorry, I'm not even remembering from Clark training what the D stands for. Degree of mastery.
Yeah, a degree of mastery, and there's another one, but a degree of skill set or something like that. It's basically how you measure that they did it successfully.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. Like when we write assessment questions or do lab activities and assessments, that is what that can help measure, is that actually being able to judge or measure how well they did something, or to what extent they did something, is important.
Like having a valid configuration file, or having a multi-epic instead of a regular epic, like something that would actually show that they were able to do it correctly, which thankfully GitLab has pretty much an error feature that would error everything out if they didn't do it correctly. So they kind of save us for a lot of that. But
what does condition mean? Like
condition? This would be anything that's relying on it. So audience is the person that's doing it. So like the associate or the trainee or the client, customer. Behavior is what you expect them to do. A condition is something that is expected. I'm trying to think of an example. So,
well, it's usually, if you see an objective that says given, right? And then it's like, you know, given a
scenario,
I don't know, given a handbook page or something, or given a customer complaint, or it's kind of like the parameters under which the person is carrying out the task.
So if there's a certain variable that you want to test, that maybe that's a skill set, but there's various variables to it, so the skill set can change depending on it, then you would want to put a condition in. So like with a starter GitLab package, create a fleshed out issue using the available pieces or something. That was a bad example, but a condition is basically something that is going to set that behavior. So something that would change that behavior if something was changed.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And then on the right-hand side here are examples of all of your action verbs.
I once heard that like the word understand is like the worst.
It's like the most hated word.
Yeah, it's not a,
Yeah.
it's really not helpful at all to any of us who
Yeah.
have to create the content or measure. I did want to say that these verbs map really nicely, I feel, with the component display theory that Kendra was mentioning. And there's actually a little recipe that I've used over the years to create different pieces of content. And I use the, it's like the verb list that Kendra has. Like, there's a categorization you can make of those to the component display theory framework. And that's like a whole nother thing that I could like do a whole hour on. It has to do with reusable learning objects, but Ruth Clark kind of, from what I'm remembering in my training with her, incorporated that as well. And it makes it all very systematic. If we can use these verbs, we can then start to categorize them to figure out how to put together in a templated way, how to put together different types of learning modules. So that's where it's really cool.
Christine, I should upload that. I still have my Ruth Clark packet thing.
Yeah.
Fun fact, we found out when we started that the person who certified me in instructional design was actually one of Christine's college professors.
Are you talking about Ruth? Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was one of my professors in my master's program. And then I had her ex-husband in my doctorate program. So I had both of the Clarks teach me directly, which was nice.
Do you think really good learning objectives can help like determine ROI as well? Like,
yes,
you can tie in the objective to the learning's return on investment.
I think so. And one thing that it does too for me is it's kind of like a checks and balances system for myself, because then I look at my objectives, they help me create the course, and then it also helps me create the exam, because anything that you test them on, you want to tie back to your objectives. So for me, not only does it help me flesh out that training and ensure that, how is this going to benefit them? Like, how is this training going to either help them do their job, or how is this training going to help them use GitLab? But it also ties into helping me ensure that my training is aligned with the objectives that I gave the customer, or in your case, like internal employees. So whoever your audience is.
Well, and Kendra, I know one of the, and we might be getting to this, but I think one of the biggest pieces that I struggle with is the delivery mechanism, right? So I'm working exclusively within Rise. So, I don't think Rise really has any true gamification pieces like Articulate 360 does. Even the scenario-based stuff is pretty rudimentary, not exactly. So I really struggle with, what modality within Rise do I use to relay which concepts?
And that's something that has been gone over and switched about 80 million times since I've been an instructional designer. But for me, it really depends on the interaction that I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for a straightforward course with kind of minimal interaction, then I would use something like Rise. If it's something that I would need to do a lot of breaks or a lot of knowledge checks to ensure that the customer is still understanding what we're trying to train and have those breaks in between, then I would use something like Storyline, because it has a lot more variable features. And I also use a lot of gamification. So all of my games are built in Storyline because they have that variable availability where you don't have that in Rise. Also, anything that you want scenario-based, I would really say to put in Storyline, because scenario-based training and the branching is a lot easier to do in Storyline. In Rise, branching is impossible.
Yep.
And Kendra, what's branching? What is that term referring to?
So say you have a scenario and you say, okay, this is the customer. Here's X, Y, and Z. Here's a scenario, bad, or great. You have 3 answers, and say they pick the middle one. So then the customer responds, hey, that's not what I wanted. And the scenario changes based on what they're choosing. So that would be branching. That's something where they select an answer and it takes them off to one path, but if they selected a different answer, it would take them to another.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like I do branching for our system admin training, depending on what install method they chose. So if they're HA, they click it and it goes down a different training path. If they did Omnibus, they click it and it goes down a different training path.
Yeah, it's like kind of like choose your own adventure, which I was really hoping I could do with Rise, because I don't know how to use, I don't know how to use 360, and I'm not an instructional designer. I'm not even a graphic designer.
Well, use the tools that we have. I mean, one thing that I will say is LinkedIn Learning has some really good tutorials on Storyline and on Rise. So using Storyline snippets, you can actually port Storyline interactions into Rise. So LinkedIn Learning has a really good course on Rise, and it has another really good one on Storyline as well.
Oh, okay.
As far as creating good evaluation or quiz questions, the main things that I talk about are quiz question context. So you can't quiz a topic that you didn't cover in the training. So making sure that they always tie back to what you trained in class, keeping it short. Well, you can have a really great scenario-based question itself that could be a little bit longer. You always want to make sure that your answers are short and concise, so they're not reading 18 paragraphs as they go through a question. Apparently I didn't put this one in here, my bad. Well, you get some information with CI in there. Avoid negative questions or answers. The problem with these is people, it's what their eye pays attention to first. So they'll read right over it, because if they're a speed reader like I am, you skip through some words as you're reading a topic. So say like, which of the following is not, you know, a feature of GitLab. So try to avoid those whenever possible, because they're easy for them, like especially speed readers, to misconstrue, and then they'll answer incorrectly. And always make sure that you tie back to your learning objectives of the course. So you want your quiz questions to reflect the learning objectives that you put forward in the beginning of the course. So how are you going to test that they actually are able to do those learning objectives?
Are there any secrets to like creating quiz questions? Like, I think sometimes the L&D side, like, can get bogged down in like creating questions, the wrong answers too. Like that can be really difficult. I don't know if there's any like tips or tricks to just
Christine's way better at that. She fixes mine all the time when I mess up.
Yeah.
But for me, I always try to make it relatable to the topic, and you always want to make sure that there can't be more than one yes answer. So even if there's one that they would question on, make sure that there's one clear yes answer, but make sure that it's relatable. So like say, for example, I'm trying to think of one in my head. And I just totally spaced. There was one question model that I used to use quite a lot, but I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to dig out and find it and then send the blog article over. Awesome. I did put a good ADT article in the Ed content channel that talks about.
I think it'd be nice for each of us to share links that we have to different best practices, because your question, like the way I would answer your question, like, are there any tips for writing good assessment questions? Like, there's like a 2-day training I could do on that too. But there's some of our test delivery partners in the certification industry have this like the tips and tricks on their websites. So you could just go read it. But I guess my most important one, because it's a huge pet peeve of mine when it's not done right, is to make sure that whatever assessment items you have, whether that's a question someone has to answer or some sort of work product they need to create to pass their assessment, make sure that task relates very clearly to the learning objectives. And remember, the learning objectives, you're going to be very thorough and thoughtful about writing those, including verbs and all of the details in the objective, right? So if that's the purpose of the course, is for someone to be able to do that task, that objective, your questions should be making sure they can do that. It shouldn't be a trick question where you're asking them to remember a fact and that's it, right? Instead, it should be something where they have to know the fact to answer the question, but they're doing something, the skill they're applying is a lot higher level than memorizing a fact. And that's my biggest pet peeve of a lot of assessments that I see is they're asking the wrong questions. We don't know if that person can really do what we wanted them to do.
That's a good point, Christine. That's some of the feedback that I received from the field was that some of the content and the quizzes that they had taken part in seemed more like a trivia an exercise as opposed to actual knowledge absorption.
Yeah. In fact, there's a whole school of thought that says before you even build a course, build the assessment first. And then that course should support being able to complete that assessment. I think the reverse happens a lot where we build out some content and we're like, okay, let's pull some things out of that content that we're going to ask about. And that can end up with an assessment that doesn't really measure what we need it to. That's a
great suggestion.
Yeah.
At DevLearn this week, they presented something called the CETA model, which I thought was really helpful for me because it works on creating problem solving, like decision-based scenarios for certification questions. So I put the link last week in the channel, the ed content channel. So check that out when you have a minute, and they might align with what you're looking for. Just to end out some other design tips and tricks. So one big thing that I've noticed that my eyes always go to is if there's not enough white space. It's like the first thing I notice when I look at training. If it's crowded, there's too much text, there's not enough on the margins, you can tell that they expanded the text out as far as it can go. Just being mindful that you have good margins on all of your slides and your presentations to ensure that you're not crowding out the screen. So like this for me is too much text. This would be a perfect example of something that I wouldn't present to a customer. The use of images. So only use images when they add value to the training. So things like infographics, images and screenshots of the system, that type of content. If you're adding an image just to add an image or to get rid of space, don't do it. Be mindful of color themes, stick to branding colors whenever it's possible, and just be aware of how bright colors are and the combinations that can affect the learner's vision, especially if you're putting a color and then a colored text on top of it. Like I think one of the worst combinations I've ever seen was a presentation that had bright pink and then bright green text.
Oof.
I'm pretty sure it would have sent me into a seizure.
Yeah.
So just being aware of that. So and just going through the training as a learner and seeing, you know, how would this work for me if I was in this class? Would it be easy for me to read? Is it easy to see? Always make sure that you break up the content, especially because all of our training is online. You don't want to just have them be reading for 45 minutes or have them be listening to a lecture or a presentation for 45 minutes because it gets boring and they're going to start multitasking within about 5 minutes. So put in Q&A questions, polls, games, other activities to break up the monotony of the training. So there's a couple of different games that you can do in the classroom. You can do Jeopardy, you can do, you know, How to Be a Millionaire, you can do Family Feud, you can do polls, you can do, you know, random Q&A sessions, you can do discussion questions. There's lots of different ways that you can break up, you know, kind of the boringness of, I hate lecture-based training, so I'm pretty biased when it comes to that, but just try to make it as interactive as possible, especially in an online environment. Now that I guess your guys' training was always remote. We just had to move to an all Zoom thing when COVID happened. So because our PSEs can no longer go to client sites. So we had to adjust a little bit. A blended learning approach is proven to be the most effective. This means using more than one type of delivery method. So a combination of a quiz, a PowerPoint, a PDF, online courses, using a mixed approach of all of those usually gets the best results because different mediums hits the different types of learners that you have in your audience. You know, if it's just one straightforward course or one objective that you're teaching, obviously you're only going to have one delivery method and maybe a knowledge check. But if it's a full blown out course or a curriculum or certification, then you would want to try to blend in as many, using a blended learning approach to ensure that you have a couple of different delivery methods. keep your training free of distractions. I know it's not as big as it used to be, but there used to be a lot of like flash GIFs that people used to put in their presentations, or like little flash images. Now that Adobe's not going to be supporting flash anymore, those are thankfully going away. But things like that, like overly bright colors, loud sounds, loud transitions, really flashy transitions, all those do is just distract from what you're trying to teach them. So try to take as much of those out as you can. Having a nice smooth transition is perfectly fine, or like animations that actually are adding value to the training. But if you're adding a ton of animations just to have animations, it's not adding any value to what you're delivering. The biggest thing that I will say is don't recreate the wheel when you don't have to. So use templates when they're available, reach out to your peers for examples, for help. If there's a course that's similar, make sure that you're reaching out to the team or the original creator who created it, and checking before you create new content, because there might already be one out there. That way we reduce a lot of the duplication efforts. Our implementation with EdCast is going to help that, because we're going to be able to see very quickly what's in the system and what training we have available. But in the meantime, using Slack, our education channels, to ensure that before we go create a brand new course that's going to take 40 or 80 hours, check to make sure that there's not something that give you a quick start or something that you can use.
That makes a lot of sense. I also think, one thing we've seen with like the live learnings that we've hosted internally, like using those as like a networking forum as well for managers or participants, just to get team members to learn from each other. I think since you are remote, just being able to hear other people's perspective is really valuable. Like those forums sometimes don't exist. So using learning to facilitate that. I don't know if you could do that with customers, but
having a feedback loop with whoever you have who's actually consuming your content. So you want to have a course survey for everything that you deliver, because you want to know if it was effective and if you reach the objectives that you were trying to reach, because that gives you that return on investment that you're trying to correlate with. We send a course evaluation survey for everything that we deliver to our customers. They don't always fill it out, but we send it out and get as much data as possible.
Yeah.
And as far as your last question for difficult creating content in an ASEAN environment, there has been times where, just due to the fact that everybody is busy, like extremely busy periods, like usually right before QBR, getting feedback just based on availability. Like sometimes if the TAMs are too busy or the pro serves is too busy, it can be a little difficult getting feedback sometimes. But it really depends on the urgency that you put behind it. So one thing that I had as a best practice at my prior job is if I sent something out asking for feedback, I always put a deadline at the bottom. Please review and provide feedback by so-and-so date. And that got me a lot more responses than just putting a link out there and saying, hey, can you review this when you have time?
Gotcha.
And a best practice for me is always checking with whoever owns that team first to ensure that they actually have the bandwidth to give the feedback that I need, because it's not always possible, just due to schedules, changes in team structures, losses on the team, stuff like that. It's not a perfect world. We're not always going to have availability at the drop of a hat. So ensuring that you have those planned out ahead of time. But I think the best part of using instructional design theory is one of the first steps is to identify your SMEs and your stakeholders. So as long as you continue to follow that path and you identify those stakeholders and your SMEs early on, they're already aware that you're developing something and they're going to be contributing to the review process. So it's not going to be a big surprise. You're not just going to be dropping a link on them one day and be like, hey, give me feedback by next week. So I think ensuring that you follow that process of identifying your SMEs and your stakeholders on during the first step of the kickoff process for your content creation is best.
Yeah, that's really valuable.
Well, because you have to be valuable, you have to be, very conscientious of their time as well. So ensuring that if the most advanced notice that you can give them that something's coming down the pike that they're going to have to review or provide content to, the earlier you can do it, the better.
Yeah.
We haven't had any issues with time zones. As far as I know, I've had TAMs from, Sweden, and a couple of people on our team are, in Spain and in Amsterdam and in Bangalore, and we've never had any issues with the time zones or differences there. They just put it in a document or they put it in a review file. So if you have Articulate, really lean on Review 360, because not only will all your feedback be captured and easily accessible in that file, it makes it a lot easier for async work, because they have a link and a comment field where they can put their comments, and then you can reply back to them immediately when something's completed. If you're not using async work or Review 360, like say you're building a deck, a Google Slides PowerPoint, use the comment feature, because those comments will stay historically in the versioning, and you can also use the reply features.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this has been super helpful. I mean, I really appreciate you putting the time together to put the deck. It's
Thank you.
if you would like us to feature it, any on the L&D page or something, or the recording, definitely I'll post that on that page. So I think this could be a really valuable resource for a lot of team members.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And like Christine said, sharing best practices for articles in the channel. Like I've been trying to post as much as I can in here, like icon libraries, branding guidelines, stuff from
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that icon
Learning
library
Guild
was great. Thank you.
Because there's a lot of stuff that we have, and there's a lot of great illustrations on that GitLab has that we use from the marketing team. So just make sure that you leverage what we have instead of like using a stock image. If you can find a GitLab illustration instead, is always best practice.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks for setting
And I
that
think
up.
everybody on here is in this channel. Yeah.
I don't think
And then if
Alvaro's
you
on
have
there.
any questions,
I didn't see Alvaro on there.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull it up actually, that Slack channel.
Oh, yeah, you're in there.
Oh, there he is.
I'm not.
It's not in alphabetical order, so it throws you off.
Oh yeah, I am.
Got it. Look, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
You
This
guys
is
have
really
any
cool.
last minute questions or concerns?
I think so. This is super
I do
helpful.
One thing I will say is 2 really good websites is td.org and eLearning Guild.
Mhm.
These 2 websites have a ton of really good information for building and designing content. And they have a bunch of articles if you want to go read about any specific topic, like creating objectives or, better quiz questions. They have tons of content on those websites.
Very cool.
And they screen their authors ahead of time so that you know that the people who are giving you content actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, nice.
All right.
Great.
Well, thank
That
you.
was super helpful. I learned a ton, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking for it. It's nice to get all of the curation teams together.
Yeah, we should do it more often, but
Very
keep
true.
it keep it ad hoc. Nobody wants another standing meeting, I'm sure.
Very true.
Awesome.
If you can post this in the Ed Content channel too, Josh. That way, for the ones who weren't able to attend, they can watch it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll do that. Thanks, Kendra. Appreciate the
All right.
time.
Thank you. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.